We are going to discuss about CSS preprocessors at this webinar. Welcome all. My name is Prashant and I'm an instructor at SKUcode and I handle front-end web technologies at SKUcode. So SKUcode is a training startup, education startup, training startup. And today we are going to talk about, we're going to get an introduction to CSS preprocessors. So let's begin with the webinar. CSS preprocessors are basically tools which will help you to use features that are not available in CSS. Now, CSS has been there for a long time. CSS, if you see the history of the web, CSS began somewhere around 96, somewhere roughly. And then it has evolved over time. And right now we have the latest version of CSS, which is, you can call it CSS 3. So even after so much evolution, there are still problems with CSS. CSS is a very declarative language, and it lacks a lot of the programming constructs that developers are used to. For example, CSS does not have looping, CSS does not have branching, all right? So when you write code in CSS, due to these things, it does not have even variables. So when you write code in CSS, typically it gets very unmanageable after a point of time. So especially for large applications where let's say the CSS is at least 1,000 lines plus, it gets really unmanageable. The styles and all, you don't know where the styles are coming from, and your code gets very repetitive. All right. So when the app gets really large, you will have things like a repetition of colors of a theme. So usually whenever you build an app, a website or something, you'll have a theme for your website. There'll be thematic colors. There'll be a primary color for it. There'll be colors that you'll use in error blocks and so on. There'll be font sizes that you'll use throughout your application. For example, headings, you might want to display in one font. Links, you might want to display in one font and a given font size. These font sizes can repeat across different elements. And when they repeat, the code that you write to assign them font sizes, etc., also will repeat. Okay, so there's a lot of repetition in CSS because there is no concept of variables, etc. There are no reusable blocks. Okay, I'm talking about not the latest version of CSS. Now browsers have evolved, CSS has also evolved. So right now things like variables, etc., are coming into CSS. All right. But I'm talking about a general browser support that you'd have. Let's say you will have to handle at least 5-year-old browsers, at least. So you cannot use variables in that case. So what do? What are the other problems with CSS? There are no reusable blocks. Okay. For example, you have all this kind of repetitive code you would have seen. For example, vendor prefix codes. Whenever you want to give a border radius, you'll say, okay, WebKit border radius, Mozilla border radius, MS border radius, Opera border radius, then the border radius. So there's a lot of, and each time you use border radius, you'll have to do this. All right. So a lot of times we require reusable blocks of code. We don't want to repeat ourselves. All right. So CSS in general, due to its absence of variables and all these problems of prefixes that you'll have to give for a lot of experimental CSS properties to support reasonably old browsers. So due to all these problems, CSS code is not dry, what's known as dry. Dry is a term which expands to don't repeat yourself. It's a normal programming practice where you say that, okay, if you're repeating yourself, it's bad code, because once you repeat yourself, you want to make changes, you'll have to make changes in multiple places. All right. So you should not repeat yourself, be it blocks of code, all right, be it maybe some variable, some method you're accessing again and again. So instead, you can store the return value in a variable and use it. All right. So you should not repeat yourself. So CSS as such is not meant for dry code. All right. So you'll have to do a lot of tricks you'll have to implement to actually make your code as dry as possible. But still, it's not good enough. CSS also does not support, I'm again talking about reasonably old browsers. CSS does not support calculations, for example. All right. So it's very hard to manage code for grids, etc. Today you have a 12-column grid. Tomorrow I want to make it a 24-column grid. Okay. I hope you're aware of grids. So we are assuming CSS knowledge in this webinar. So basically, if you have want to change the number of columns in a grid, again, you'll have to make code changes in a lot of places if you're using pure CSS to build your grids. Things like CSS imports. So you have this import statement, add import statement in CSS directive in CSS. So if you're going to use this directive, it's going to cause, you can include other CSS files in one CSS file. But the problem is each and every include is going to cause an extra HTTP request. So every time you include a file, it's going to be an extra HTTP request, and your app is going to get slow basically because of that. So, and then there are very complex cascades that become very difficult to figure out. For example, you have a nav, within that you have an unordered list, within that you have list item, within that you have some anchor tags. Okay, the normal flow for structure you'd have for, let's say, a primary menu. All right, so when your the HTML structure gets very complex, just to scope your elements, you will keep adding prefixes to your selectors. So you keep adding, okay, nav space ul greater than li space a, something like that. So uh, because of all this, it becomes very difficult to understand your selectors and manage the selector specificities. Okay, so that your elements get the right styles. To ensure that it gets the right styles, it really becomes very complex. It becomes even complex to understand the selector sometimes. So because of all these problems, CSS gets really manageable, unmanageable after some point of time. So what CSS preprocessors basically help you do, they help you cut down this complexity. Okay, so they are more programmer friendly, you can say, in that in that sense. So they introduce the concept of variables. All right, so the concepts across different preprocessors, CSS preprocessors that are available and popular in the market are roughly the same. All right, they may differ very slightly from each other, but roughly they're the same. So you have concepts like variables, you have concepts like looping, branching, if conditions. You have concepts like inheritance of classes, introducing reusable code through functions and mixins, and so on. So all these problems which we just discussed, they will not be there when you use CSS preprocessors. So what are some popular CSS preprocessors? Okay, so let me name a few. So first of all, there is Sass, which is the most popular CSS preprocessor. So you go to head over to sass-lang.com. This is the site for Sass. Sass stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. All right, it's written in only title case, so S caps and ASS lowercase. Then there is less. Okay, so lesscss.org, I believe. Okay, so this is another alternative to Sass. This is an alternative to Sass, which is also popular. Then there are upcoming alternatives like Stylus, and there is one more very popular alternative that's coming up these days known as PostCSS. PostCSS is not strictly a preprocessor. It is more like something that enables preprocessing. Okay, so I'll just mention these two. So there is Stylus, styluslang.com. And then there is PostCSS, which is becoming quite popular, which is not really a preprocessor, but it's a tool which enables preprocessors. Okay. So roughly these are the popular ones. If you're looking to scale up on something, I would highly recommend Sass because it is the most popular CSS preprocessor. Okay, today. It is much more popular than less. For that reason only, there's not much of feature-wise difference between the two. But for the reason that it has more market value, yeah, I would recommend you learn Sass if you have to start off with one. Okay. Later, you can move to something like PostCSS and learn how it works also because it's upcoming and it holds a lot of promise. So this is one place where you can go to see, okay, what people are using. Okay, so you can see the popularity of Sass. It's like 66%. This was a survey conducted by someone recently. So you can see 2 years back, all right. So 66% of the people are using Sass, developers who are surveyed. 13% are using less. All right. Some of them use new preprocessor, and Stylus is used by few. Okay, this was when post CSS wasn't there or probably not popular. Okay, it came around that time only, 2015, post CSS. So now it's gaining popularity. So now that we understand what are the popular preprocess, what is exactly preprocessing step like? So essentially, it's like if you have worked with, let's say, Babel, what Babel does for JavaScript, same thing. You can say it converts ES6 to ES5 essentially. Most of the times, that's what we do. So in a CSS preprocessor, you will write styling code in the language of the preprocessor. So every preprocessor defines a language. So there is Sass and there is less. Okay. So Sass and less are both supersets of CSS. So when I say they are supersets of CSS, essentially it means that every CSS file is also a valid less file, and every CSS file is also a valid Sass file. So suppose you want to create a less file. You have a CSS file. Rename the .css part to .less or .scss, which is Sass's extension, and you'll have a valid less and Sass file. Okay, so that's what I mean by it's a superset of CSS. So everything that's valid CSS is also valid less code. It is also valid Sass code. But apart from whatever CSS offers, obviously, there are more features that less and Sass offer. So there'll be constructs that you'll use which do not exist in CSS. All right. So it's a proper superset. So if you're familiar with TypeScript again, you know the types, everything that you write in JavaScript is also valid TypeScript. You just have to rename the .js to .ts, and it's a valid TypeScript file. The same holds for less and Sass. Okay. Everything that you write in CSS is also valid less code. It is also valid Sass code. So what happens in the pre-processing step? Again, just like any other pre-processing transpilation, the code that you write either in less or Sass will get converted to CSS code. Okay, that's what is going to happen. Because your browser can understand only CSS, you need to convert it to either less code or the less code to either CSS. You need to convert it to either the less or the Sass code to CSS. Okay, so that's all is the pre-processing step. You have to run it through a tool which will convert whatever code you have written in less or Sass to CSS. All right. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to see is less. Okay, this is the agenda for this webinar. We're going to first see how less works, how the syntax of less, the features provided by less, how you will install it, the various ways to install and use, the various features. And then we'll move to, sorry, this is syntactically. So then we'll move to Sass, where we'll see how to install the transpiler for Sass, and we'll see what the features are. So we'll see the equivalent, whatever we implement in less, we'll see the equivalent in Sass also, and a few more features in Sass. So we'll concentrate a little more on Sass because it is more popular. All right. So that's it. So that's the agenda for this webinar. So it gives you an introduction to both less and Sass. So let's get started with less. So if you want to use less, there are quite a few options you have. All right. If you want to just get, so let's head over to lesscss.org. So you have quite a few options. If you see what options you have, you can either install it via npm. All right. I am again assuming you have a knowledge of Node here, Node.js. So Node.js is just a JavaScript runtime that you can use to build web applications also. And npm is the package manager for Node. So we'll be using that to install. If you don't have this installed Node.js, head over to nodejs.org. Okay, and install one of these two. It's just a single click install. It'll take you through a wizard. Once that's done, you'll have this npm tool available in the command line. All right. So we are going to use npm to install to actually download the Node packages for that's the less compiler and also the Node Sass compiler. So for both the compiler for both less and Sass, we'll install as npm modules. Okay, so let's get started. So one option you have is to install through npm. Another option you have is to actually download download the code code that will run in the browser. There's a script that can run in the browser. So you have to download the script, which you can find here. Okay, somewhere down you should find it here. Either in the source, you can just head over to the source code otherwise, or it's there in one of the CDN. CDN.js hosts this less.min.js, which you can include in your browser. So what this will do is it will help you. You can run less code directly. You can include import less code, and you can run your less code directly in the browser if you don't want to go through that pre-compilation step. For example, when you are experimenting and learning less, you can do this, but you should never do this on production because it is going to take a lot of time for the less compiler to run in the browser and then compile your less to CSS code and inject the style tag into the head, which is what it will do. So let's get started by seeing how we can use the browser to run less directly using the script, less script, and then we'll see how to actually use the npm module to precompile. So let's go to the okay. If you just head over to this place, okay, you'll get the less min file, or you can go to the GitHub repo and you can download the less min file. Okay. So this is the less min file. I can either, okay, let me save it. Okay, so I will save it in a directory that I have created. All right, so less.min, I'll create a directory here, a folder here called less demos. And within this, let me create another directory, JS. And within that, let's store this less min.js. All right, so we have the script that is necessary to run it in the browser. So what do we do to run it in the browser? Okay, so the plan for for this webinar, for the demos, is I have a set of CSS files. So the same code, I'll show you how I can translate into less. Okay, for example, okay, first of all, if you're running it in the browser, you will require it to run it in a local web server at least, because it does Ajax calls when you're running it in the browser. Less script in the browser, it'll do an Ajax call to fetch the less file and then convert it to CSS in the client side. So I'll have to start a web server. So let me start a simple web server. Okay, so I'll start a simple node-based web server. So you can install this web server by saying npm install -g http server. Simple static file server it is. It can serve all your static files. All right. So HTTP server, let me start it in this folder. So this is going to be my web root. So head over to 127.0.0.1.80.81. All right. So yeah, now we are serving through the web server. So basically, let's create this simple page first. So I want a crimson color for my headings and a red underline for this links, for these links. Very simple page. Okay, so basically this is the page. a heading and some paragraph text with some link, which is underlined red, crimson again. If you see how you do this in CSS, it would be something like this. So we are including the CSS and we are saying for H1 tags, give a color of red. Okay, it's red. And for A tags, for the anchor tags, give a text decoration underline, which is going to be in red color. All right. So this is how you would do in CSS. Already you can see one problem of CSS here. This red color is being repeated across multiple places. In a large file, it will be repeated across many places. Okay, so that's the problem. All right, you want a theme of red color, let's say this way, but you cannot enforce that theme in any manner. You will have to repeat yourself again and again. And tomorrow, if I'm going to change to, let's say, blue, I'll have to change in this place as well as this place. Imagine if you have a big file, how many places you'll have to make these changes. Imagine all the problems that can come when you're changing. So this is a problem we are right away seeing with CSS. All right. So let's try to write the same code for less. All right. So I'll copy this intro first. All right. And then I'm going to create a folder here. And I'm going to call it less. This is where all the less files are going to go. So instead of CSS, we are going to write less code. So first, let me copy the CSS file and I'll show you how to change it. So I'll copy the CSS file into our less thing. And as such, let it be like this for now. We know that all valid CSS files are less files. So I can simply rename the CSS file as .less file. Okay. And I have a valid less file. This is a valid less file now. Now, how do I run it in the browser? So what you need to do, you need to include the less.min.js script in your page. That's the first step, so that in the browser, your compilation from less to CSS can happen. And you need to include the style sheet. However, for the relation attribute, you'll need to give style sheet /less. Okay, so this will prevent the browser from actually fetching this file. All right. So, and later the script is going to fetch it through Ajax and it's going to render it, convert it to CSS and render the page. Okay, apply the styles. So we have to give rel equal to style sheet /less. Okay, this is only if you're running all this in the browser. Otherwise, you would have precompiled it to CSS and you will be including the CSS file. So style sheet less, and then within less folder, we have the 01 intro.less now. Okay. Type should remain text/CSS. All right. So that's all we need to actually use less in the browser directly. So let's open this. So we are now going to open less demos. Okay, so you can see that it's actually applying the styles. Okay, there was a slight flicker. That's because it had to fetch the less file, do the compilation. That's why it's not recommended in production or something. It's going to take some time for all this. It's not good to do this in the browser itself. So what has happened now? If you're seeing what is happening, let me refresh the page. Just see the requests that have gone on. First, you got the HTML page. Then you got the min.js, less.min.js. Then what has happened is less has finally the JS file, script file, when it's executed, it's finally gone ahead and fetched this thing, and it's fetched it through Ajax. You can see it's an Ajax call, XHR, right? So it has fetched it. Once it fetches it, it's going to compile this less code, okay, which is basically the same CSS file only. We made no use of less constructs. So it'll fetch that, and what it's going to do is in the head, it's going to inject a style tag after compilation. So it'll compile, it is injected the style tag. You can see this is not something we have written, and it has included the compiled CSS here. You can see h1 color red, anchor tag, text decoration, underline red. All right, so at least we are able to run less code in the browser now. What's the next step? So the next step would be to use some less construct in your less file. All right, so immediately we see that there is repetition. Less allows use of variables. This is the first thing we'll be seeing. So as an introduction, we'll see how to use a variable. Later we'll see more details about using variables. So in less, a variable is specified using the add symbol, and then you give a name, okay, and you specify a value this way, end it with a semicolon, right? So add name of the variable, colon, its value. So these values can take lots of things. Later we'll see some more kinds of values. Okay, you can give font sizes, you can give font families, you can give any kind of things. It will just do code token substitution essentially. Okay, so this instead of red, we are going to use the primary color variable now. This is how you make use of variables. Instead of red, I'll use the primary color variable. All right. So there we have less code actually. Now we run this again in the browser, refresh, and you see the exact same output. All right. This time though, we are not repeating ourselves. The code has got compiled, less code. All right. If you see the less code that is fetched, just to convince yourself, you can look at the less response. You'll see that it is the updated one. This is what is fetched now. It has these variables. Then during the compilation process, the wherever primary color variable appears, it's going to get substituted with red. All right, so it's become color red and text decoration underline red. You can see here in the final style that is injected, it's the same old things, h1 color red, text decoration underline red. So already we can see the power of less. We have avoided repetition of that color red, and now it is logically you can make out, okay, the red is the primary theme color and you've used it in multiple places. Okay, so that's an introduction to less. Okay, so now let's move to the next thing, which is next feature of less, nesting. So typically, if I have some if I have some CSS for this file. Okay, let's see this file first of all. There's a section, an introduction section, which has a heading and some paragraph text with a link. All right, and then there is another paragraph with again some links. Okay, how do you style this? If let's say you want to style only the h1s within the section intro, okay, within the element with class intro, you wanted to style only those h1s. Usually there'll be only one h1 on the page, but anyway. Or maybe let's say you want to style only those anchor tags which lie within the intro section. You want to style those anchor tags, those links separately. Maybe you want to give them a red color on hover. Okay, so how would you do that? So the CSS would look something like this. You've included here nesting2.css. So it looks something like this. All right, you'll have to scope it, right? So your h1 tag, you're scoping it essentially with your .intro. So this means that all h1 tags that lie somewhere within your element with class intro. So you're scoping the h1 tag with the class intro. You're scoping the anchor tag with an ancestor again, which has class intro. All right, and you're scoping, let's say, when the anchor tag is hovered upon. So you're saying when an anchor tag which is within .intro element is being hovered upon, then you'll have to give, let's say you want to remove the underline and you want to make it red color, the link itself red color. So it's going to look something like this. Okay, so you have the h1 which is in red color because it's an h1 within the intro section, and then you have this link which is within the intro section. When you hover upon it, the underline goes and it becomes red color. But this is not within the intro section, this paragraph. So when you hover upon this, it doesn't get the red color. Okay, so because we have scoped this, the link within the intro section, and the h1, both of them get red color. All right, so this is how we would do it in CSS. We would keep scoping things whenever we want to target only particular elements within some particular element or some hierarchy in the page. So how would you do the same thing in less? Can you do better? Again, if you see, we have repeated ourselves by saying, okay, intro h1, intro a colon hover. So less has this feature called nesting. So let's do the same thing through nesting. So I'll just copy this file, okay, into our less demos and see how we can do it in less. So I'll copy this CSS also into, basically I'm showing you how you translate normal CSS code that you would write in a fashion that less makes more manageable. Right, so I just again renamed it to .less, the CSS file. So our nesting.html remains the same, except that now I'm going to include CSS slash, okay, again style sheet slash less if you're going to run it in the browser. Okay, so let's say I don't want to run it in the browser. We'll do that next actually. Let's do this, then we'll see it next. Okay, so still I'm running it in the browser, so I'll have to include that script tag. Okay, and we'll include instead from within the less folder 02 nesting.less. Okay, so this is going to work definitely because everything that is CSS is also valid less. So if you see here, if it's not working, I need to check what's gone wrong. Either something is not being fetched, it's being fetched, or some include here is wrong. Text less and this is right. Am I including the right files? Okay, let's check the elements tab. Let's check the head portion to see. So you see the style is not injected. Something is going wrong somewhere. All right, link rel equal to style sheet slash less js less. Okay, the problem is I am actually fetching it again through the file protocol. We have to access it by the web server. All right, so I'll start it from the web root like so. So that it can make Ajax calls. Now it has made the Ajax call and it has fetched this less file and it has compiled and shown it. All right, so you can see that this will work. Okay, so there's nothing special. We have just renamed the CSS as a less file. So it is fetched and it's injected. All right, but what can we do better? So less has this concept of nesting of selectors. So whenever you have such hierarchies and based on that you're scoping, like within intro there is an element with class intro that is h1a that you want to style and so on. All you need to do is you need to place it like this. You don't have to scope it. The fact that you are placing within an intro block will take care of the scoping. In fact, you can even further nest this. I'll show that this works first of all. If you refresh this, It works just as before, all right? But you can improve this further. How can we improve this? So instead of placing H1, the colon hover within a separate block within intro, what I can do is I can place colon hover within A's block and prepend it within ampersand. All right, so this will, ampersand means whatever is the selector till then. So till then you have to see it is dot intro space A. That's how it will translate it as. And then from there on colon hover. So this will essentially be dot intro space A colon hover. This is the selector basically. This will be essentially dot intro space H1. All right, and this will be dot intro space A. If you observed here, this is not throwing an error. I'm giving such comments which are not allowed in CSS. Okay, this is a less style comment. You can say single line comment, and it's also a silent comment, which means this comment will not appear in the output code. If you give usual CSS style comments, this will appear in the output. This comment will appear in the output, all right? Usual CSS style comments. But this style of commenting is specific to less, and it will not appear in the output also. So if you want to see internally, okay, what does less translate to, you need not actually load it in the browser and test every time. So you can see that this is also working fine. And you can see that into the head tag, it has injected a style with the same set of styles as before. And if you want to convince yourself that actually the latest less file is being fetched, you can just check in the network tab, what's the response to the less. You see that this is actually the latest file with the nesting of selectors. All right. So less has this nesting concept. Okay, now how do I actually find out? Do I need to create an HTML file, include, and then check the style tag that's injected to see what's the translation? You don't really have to. So there are lots of online playgrounds and online transpilers that will show you what the translated code looks like. For example, one of them is mentioned here. I think it's called less2 CSS or something like that. Maybe it will be mentioned somewhere else, or I have a link in the README file, so you can check out this place. So if you want to see what this less code will translate to in CSS, you just copy paste this, just like you have the online Babel transpiler and all. So you can see that this is what our less code translates to in CSS. This is what got injected into our style tag also. So intro, within that block we have given h1a, and within a we are given ampersand colon hover. So all that has translated to the scoped selectors only. Dot intro space h1. Except that this is much more manageable and readable. Okay. So it has translated to the way we have written CSS. All right. So we understand nesting of selectors also. Okay. So now let us actually stop doing this in the browser, because it's not, you cannot anyway use in production, but you can experiment this way. So what we're going to do is we are going to use Node to install a Node module, npm to install a Node module, which will help do the transpilation, So basically there is this less compiler, less C, which can be installed through npm. All right. So you need to say npm install -g less, and then that will install the command line tool, basically Node module less C. Okay, it's executed as less C. It takes basic syntax to take the input less file and the output less file. Okay, so let's try this out. So I have node installed, so npm is there. Okay, so I'll say this is a node. This is a node. This is a node. This is a node project. All right. So I'll say npm install globally less. It's already installed. I'm just going to reinstall. All right, it's done. So now we'll have to use, you will have less C which is available, probably. Okay, so it's available, less compiler. So let's use this. So how do you use this? You say less C in its basic syntax, you say less C, and then you will give the path to the input file. So our input is within less folder. Within that another, less demos folder. Within that there's a less folder. And what is it we want to compile? We want to compile 02 nesting.less, and let's say I want to put it in an output directory. Now let me create an output directory. So within our less demos itself, let's create one more directory and call it build. And within the build folder, I'll create one more folder, CSS. So this is where the less file has to go. So let's say less demos / build folder / CSS folder, and it should be called 02 nesting dot CSS. Okay, so it's done. So you check out the build folder now. There is a nesting.css, which is exactly the translation. So you can see it has taken our less file, and whatever we saw online using the online transpiler, same thing has been done now on our local system. So we have the CSS file. So that's it. So now our problem of including the script file is resolved. So I'm not going to anymore include this way. I'll simply include the CSS file that is built. Okay, and we don't require this, so knock it off. All right, so now we have a proper workflow in place. Okay, at least a simple workflow in place. So, sorry, it has to be run through the web. No, it need not be now. So no more the web server is required also. So I'm just launching it from my file system itself. If it's not coming up, then some include has gone wrong. There should be CSS. Okay, so now we have used the less file, translated it locally, transpiled it locally into the CSS file, and we are able to use it. All right. So we have seen nesting, we have seen how to compile it locally also now. So the next feature that we'll be seeing is imports. So one of the major advantages of imports is that it helps modularize code. It helps you break down your large CSS files into manageable portions. So this is a very big help actually, imports. Now, if you're doing in CSS imports, you do something like this. Okay, so you will have a file, and let's say it includes another file, CSS file, an HTML document includes this CSS document. And what this CSS document does is basically it defines some styles, and then maybe it imports a reset style sheet. Okay, so a reset style sheet is basically a style sheet which is going to remove all the styling given by the browser, the default styling given by the browsers for H1s, anchor tags, for list items, and so on. So we are using a reset style sheet here, and we are doing a CSS import. We are using the add import directive of CSS. So what this is going to do, okay, it is going to raise another HTTP request if you see. So if you check out the requests that go out when we launch this page, so you're seeing that the browser fetched the HTML page, then it fetched the import.css which was included within the HTML page. The CSS file in turn includes reset.css. So one more HTTP call has gone out. You can see there's one more call. Okay, in this case it's not HTTP, but whatever. So one more call has gone out to actually fetch reset.css. So we have three HTTP calls. And if your CSS file is going to include many other files, then there will be so many other HTTP requests that go out. Okay, that's bad. We don't want so many HTTP requests. Instead, if we can have a way to include, let's say within this import.css, reset.css, basically we want those styles. Let's say if there is a way to actually cut and paste whatever is there in the reset. So I've already downloaded a reset CSS. Okay, this is a popular reset, so I've downloaded this. If there's a way to actually cut and paste it in this place, it would be great. Okay, let's say that's what I want, then it would be great. So how can I do this in, so there's no direct way in CSS to do this, right? So you'll have to do some kind of file processing if you want to do some pre-processing steps still you have to do. So Less has this feature of imports that will help you do the exact same thing that we just discussed. So what we're going to do, let's copy this. All right, and let's copy the CSS also into Less folder. I'll rename it as .less. Okay, and I'll copy the external reset style sheet also. So we have copied the reset style sheet here. Okay, and I'll just rename, because every CSS file is also a valid Less file. I need not do this, I'll tell why, but anyway I'll do it. I prefer doing this. So I'll rename it as rest.less, reset.less. Okay, so you just copied everything from our CSS demos folder. Okay, now how will you do the same thing in Less? So our import.html, first of all, let's change it to the build folder CSS. Okay, so this is ready. So what we can do in Less is, instead of using CSS, whenever we use import in Less, by default it's not going to be a CSS import. It is going to do what is known as a Less import. Okay, there is a way I think to enable even CSS imports, but by default the compiler will do Less imports. What that will do is, it will basically take this file and it will paste it, the contents of the file here. That's what it will do. So if you actually run it through the Less compiler, this import.less, okay, we have even renamed it to Less. Okay, we can leave it like this, reset.css if it's a CSS file, but if it's a Less file, we need not even give the Less extension. So we can import both CSS as well as Less files. For Less files, you don't require to give the .less extension. Okay, if you run this through the compiler, okay, so we're running 03 imports, import it's called, 03 import. Okay, so I get the output file. If you see the output file, so I think I need to refresh. So if you see the output file, it's just a single file which has the reset styles, and at the end you have your own styles. All right, up to here is the reset styles. So this is your styles. So now we have achieved whatever we wanted. So this include that's happening will not issue another HTTP request because it's a single file. That import has been replaced with the actual file contents, the reset file contents. So here there are only two. One is the HTML and another is the import.css. There is no reset.css that's fetched. That has been included as part of this. Okay, and we get the exact same styling. It's the exact same thing. All right. So imports is a feature that we can use to reduce HTTP requests. All right. So what's the next feature? So the next feature that we look into is called basically it's not a feature. It's basically using imports to modularize your code. So how can you go about making your code more modular? If you have large CSS, how will you make it more structured and manageable and split into smaller files? Because of this import, we can do this. Let's say we have something like this page. All right. So it looks like the previous page only, but if you see what it does, okay, there is again a section intro with some H1 and P, and again the same thing only. But if you see the CSS, all right, it's again the same, all right, but we can do a little better. Okay, so how will you go about managing things? Let's see. So I'm just going to make a small change basically. So essentially it's the same old code. I'll rename this to modularizing styles. Okay. And what we'll do here, we'll import 04 modularizing styles.css. Okay. And let's create this file, which is essentially the same old file. Small change that we'll do. So what we're going to do is, let's say you have a lot of things on this page. Usually how we will organize the style sheet is, there'll be sections related to typography, there'll be sections related to grids, right? Colors, all right? So different sections will be there, all right? So you want to, usually what we do, we'll give some comments, okay? And maybe start off grid styles, okay? And then give one comment after it finishes, end, something like that. Okay, so but this becomes really it's in one big file. You'll have it'll be one big file. Okay, and it's not really easy to read through the entire thing. So we can just use the idea of imports now to manage our things. For example, if you had things like you want to store variables, this is one way in which you can organize the styles. It's not the only way. So what you can do, all the variables related to your page. For example, we have just one variable here. You can organize into a separate file. So what I will do, let me create one folder. I'll call it includes. Okay, and within this, I'll create a file. I'll name it as variables.list. And this is going to define all the variables that I'm going to use across my application. So maybe the primary color, red. So I've defined it here. Now I'll use it, sorry, add primary color. So now I'm going to use this inside this by simply importing that. Okay, usually variables will be the first thing you'll import because they'll be used by other modules following it also. So add import, let's say includes / variables. Again, it's a .less file, so I don't require the extension. And now I can start using the variable here. So if you have a huge style sheet, you can separate out parts related to typography, related to grid, all those things into separate modules, and then include those, import those. Right. So same thing now. Now we'll compile it again. In fact, I think I can give just the folder input and output. Okay. I'm not really sure how to, but there's a way. So let's do usual way. Okay, so you've got the output file. So you can see here in our build folder, there is modularizing styles.css with the reset styles. With the variables don't translate to anything in CSS. They're just used for substitution. So you won't find anything related to variables. All right. But you can see the red color has got substituted in place of add primary color. Right. So instead of this, the red has been substituted. So this way we can manage our code in modules. Okay, so the output will be the same. Okay, output is the same. We have this red color for this only, I think, and the underlined red for this. Okay, so the next feature that we'll see is mixins. Sorry, variables itself, variables in detail that we haven't seen yet. So let's say you have this kind of style sheet. You have this kind of a page. Okay, the same page essentially again. And this paragraph, if you see, we have added the class highlight. Okay, and the way we are styling it, basically in the CSS, in this variables.css, is this way. We have our intro h1s and the h1 and h2 coming within intro section, having these styles. Okay, some padding value, some font size value. Okay, we are giving custom font sizes now for h1, h2. So we are not using a reset. If you see here, all right, the reset is not there. And we have a paragraph should have some kind of padding, and we have these things. All right. So a lot of styling information is there here. If you see here, it'll be difficult. Let's say we want to maintain some kind of tomorrow if I decide, okay, h1 should go 1 pixel less and h2 should also go 1 pixel less, it's difficult. Okay, it's my basic idea is something like, while designing this page, is something like there is a base font size of, let's say 16 pixels, which is generally there, and my h1 should be 12 pixels over that. So 16 plus 12 is 28, and my h2 should be something like 7 pixels over that. So 16 plus 7 is 23. That's my idea actually. All right. So I'm sort of building some rules for my typography. And let's say this is like the base padding. So this padding 12 pixels is going to be used by a lot of elements on my website. So, but I'll have to repeat in all those elements that I'll be using 12 pixel, 12 pixel, 12 pixel. Okay, maybe for P it's also 12. Maybe I'll decide for H1, H2 also it's going to be 12. All right, so in all those places I'll be repeating the base padding that I've chosen for my site, which is something like 12 pixels. Similarly, the primary color that I've been discussing, red, 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 and a variation of the primary color. So this is just a lightened version of the primary color. Okay, so this is a lightened version of the primary color with more white to which leans more towards white. Red is basically FF0000. So this is more to the white side. FFs. So the red, green, and blue components have come also into the picture. So it's a lightened version of red. So the page actually looks like this. This is what I'll get through these styles. It looks like this. There is a border and there is a box shadow around the paragraph which has a class highlight. So all this is for the highlight paragraph. If you see, p.highlight has a border and a box shadow. Okay. Now how can I make this better? You can see these are all thematic. The highlight color is also following the primary color, but they are basically variants of the primary color. The primary color is red, which is being used here. But these are variants of the red color only. Okay, maybe light versions, maybe saturated versions of the primary color, and so on. Okay, so how can I make this better? So again, let me copy the basic HTML file. So I'll copy it here. Right. So we're going to use the built version. Let me copy the CSS file into the less folder, and I'll rename it with .less extension. Okay. So how can we make this better using variables? So I'm going to use a lot of other variables now in vars. Okay, let's see what we can introduce. Let's say I want, as I mentioned, I want a base font size of 12 pixels. Okay, so what I'll do is in the variables, I'll introduce a variable called font size base, and I'll set it to, let's say, 16 pixels. All right. Now what I can do, I can come back here and you'll see the wonder of less here. So instead of 28, I'm going to use base font size or font size base, and I'm going to add 12. Okay, so now this is 16 pixels, and when I say plus 12, it will interpret the units also. Since this is in pixels, so if you see here, this variable has also the unit pixels. So your variable values can not only take named colors or something, they can even take united values. Okay, so here it is 16 pixels plus 12, so I'll make it 28 pixels. Similarly, here I'm going to substitute with plus 7. If you want, you can give the pixel also. All right. Similarly, there is a base padding that I'm using, and for H1s, I'm using base padding plus 6 pixels. So let me set a base padding size also. And what I'm going to do here is use padding base plus 6. Okay. And same for here. Okay, if I find myself repeating, okay, I'm using padding base plus 6, maybe I can even define a new variable here. So what I'll do, I'll probably define something like padding base, padding large, and define that to be padding base plus 6. Okay. So you can even use variables in while defining other variables. So if you're using padding base while defining the value for padding LG. So now you can use padding LG directly. Right. So we have certain other things. For example, this we can substitute with primary color. Now this color here is actually a variation of the primary color. Okay, where the red component has gone a bit down. In fact, it is 4/5 of its original value. Its original value red is basically FF000. 4/5 of it, basically every component multiplied by 0.8 would be red, green, and blue multiplied by 0.8 would result in this color. Now you can do things like this in less. So all these operators you can use on your variables. So plus we have used. Here we are using multiplication. So multiplying by 0.8 to get a slightly toned down red, not the bright red. And similarly for this, I can use something like, if you want, you can even define, if you're finding yourself repeating this again, you can define it as a separate variable like we did just now for padding large. Okay, you can call it maybe primary color toned down, something you can call it. You can do things like lighten. Okay, there are functions that you can apply on colors. There are lots of such functions actually. You can say, okay, you lightening the primary color by, let's say, 40% or 35% or something. Okay. What this is going to do, it is going to basically increase the lightness of this color. So it will add more of the other components. So the green and blue components will get added. So you'll get a lighter version for the box shadow. So you can see we have actually used a lot of variables now. Okay, here too you can substitute. And now if I decide to change padding the base size anytime, I can simply make a change in one place and everything else will get updated. Padding large will also get updated. Padding base will also get updated. So this way you can see already how it's making your code very dry. Of course, we have not used inheritance and all, so of course you can go ahead and use all those things. In this example, it's not being used, but you can do that. Okay. So that would be with the inheritance. All right, so let's see the output for this. Let's compile this. Okay, that's a mistake. So it says variable primary colored is undefined. Okay, this is on line 17 of variables.list. Okay, so if we see this now, okay, first of all, we can verify the generated CSS. Looks fine. right? It looks just the way we want. You can see all the substitutions have happened. You can see there's a lightened version of the red now, CC000, not lightened, sorry, toned down version, and this is the lightened version of the red. Oh, sorry. So we have got what we had started off with. So this similar to the CSS one. Okay, everything is working. So then the last concept that we are going to see regarding less. After this, we'll move to Sass and quickly do a run through of Sass, because there's quite a bit pending in Sass, but it's all the same concept, so it'll be very quick in Sass. So what we'll see is mixins. All right. So if you have to do something like this, let's say you have this kind of a page which looks like this in CSS. You have HTML and CSS you built. The same highlight thing, and if you see here, we have a 3-column layout. The important thing to note here is we are using border radius for both these elements. So this first element on top, you can see the corners are rounded. So you're using a border radius. I think we are using 4 or 5 as a border radius. Whereas for this 3-column layout, for each of the columns, we are using a rounded border again, but it is 10 pixel border radius. So you'll find code like this for the CSS. If you see the CSS, it's included here. It'll be like this. Okay, for the paragraph, you're using a border radius, okay, and it's 4 pixels. For the, you have defined some row and column classes. For each of those columns, if you see, we're using again border radius, and again we are using 10, and we have to give all the prefixed versions. So this can get cumbersome. If you have used something like auto prefixer, you know what to do. Basically, you'll run it through an auto prefixer, and it will look for all these experimental properties, and it will substitute. It will add on these prefixed versions also. But the same thing we can achieve in a different way in less. Okay. So what we can do, let's see. So I'll just copy this mixins.css onto the less folder, rename it with .less, and I'll also copy this HTML file and have it here. Okay, and now we have to change this to build folder, mixins.css. All right. So how can we make this better? All right. So you have a concept of a mixin in less and also Sass. Okay, the concepts are very similar. So what we'll do is we will create a mixin. So in this includes, I'm going to create a file called mixins.s, and I'm going to do something like this: dot border radius. What this means, I'll explain. And then at radius, basically a variable. It's almost like a function, you can imagine. So basically we'll do this thing only. So let me copy it. So we'll substitute with the passed in radius. Okay. So this is almost like a function that you can call. All right. So imagine a function with name border radius. It takes a parameter as radius. You can even supply it a default value, something like 10 pixels, or something more sensible, let's say 4 pixels. And it is going to, wherever it gets called, it is going to insert this piece of code. All right. So how do you call it? All right. You define a mixin like this, dot, and then the mixin name, and then the parameter along with the default values, if any. So it's like a function, and it'll substitute this thing, these declarations in place of that mixin call. So let's call this mixin. So border radius. First of all, we have to import this mixin. So on top, we are going to say import from within includes mixins. Okay, now we can use the mixin. So instead of doing this, we can say dot border radius. That's it. If we don't specify anything, then the default is used. That's 4 pixels. If we give a value for the parameter, then that value will be used. For example, 10 pixels here. All right. So this is how we can. So again, it has cut down on a lot of repetition. You can see instead of 5 lines each, we just have one line, and we don't even have to pass a value if it's going to be the default. Here we don't want the 4 pixel default. We want 10 pixels. So we are passing in the parameter value. So if you compile this, you'll see that in the generated file, you will have those things auto prefixed. So sorry, not this rather than. So, oh, it's not happening. Oh, this is a less file, sorry. Built file. Yeah. So you can see here, you get the prefixed versions. So it has avoided a lot of duplication of code for you. All right. So tomorrow, if you decide, let's say you don't want to support Internet Explorer for all your border radius, you can simply remove it from the mixin. Okay. So if you see this now, it works exactly that way. All right. Some problem has happened. I made some mistake in the margins. I think somewhere it's gone wrong. Let's see. So for these columns, I think I must have deleted some line by mistake. That's all. So okay. So border, I think I deleted the margin. Okay. So margin right, I think I had given 2%. 32, yeah. Run it through the compiler again. Right. So that's about the features of less that we are going to see. Okay. So there are many more features you can explore by going to less. This site here. The references are given in this link. So let's quickly go through Sass. Okay, there's very little time. So what I'm going to do is I have a code that is already created, but it's very easy to understand now that we know less. The concepts are exactly the same, you can say. There's one extra concept, there are two extra concepts that I'll be discussing in Sass that I'll show the demo. All right, so now that we know less, it's very easy to learn something like Sass. So Sass is more popular, by the way. So the exact same things that we'll see how to do it in Sass. So these files are exactly the same HTML, except they're exactly the same. Okay, the Sass files, so you can see the exact same kind of folder structure as that. So in Sass, variables you'll be creating not with the @ symbol, you'll be creating with dollar symbol. Okay, so you have to start your variables with a dollar, not @. That's the only difference. Okay, that's the first thing. Again, Sass also has the single line comment, and it's going to be a silent comment, so it's not going to come in the output. Nesting is exactly the same like in less. You can see it's exactly the same. Within intro, there is H1 and A. So you're scoping it to within the intro section this way. Imports, you'll use again add import, exactly the same. You can import both CSS as well as Sass files. By the way, Sass, as you can see, has .scss extension. I'll show you how to install and run Sass. That I will do. So Sass actually comes in two flavors. There was an old version of Sass whose files ended with .sass extension. That is not a subset of a superset of CSS. It was quite a different language. It used indentation for blocks and all right, declarations and so on. So that was slightly different. It's not a superset of CSS. However, the newer version of Sass, the newer format, SCSS format, that is a strict superset of, that's a proper superset of uh, CSS. Okay, so every valid CSS is also valid SCSS. So you can see the nesting is exactly the same. Imports, basically you do similar to less. Again, add import. You don't have to give .scss extension if it is a CSS file. If you see here, this reset style sheet, I've renamed it as CSS. If it is CSS also, for no problem, you can give .css. It will accept it. It will include it. Then the next concept, modularizing, exactly the same. You can create modules. For example, we have created a colors module here with all the colors. All right. So your mixins can be separate. Your components, for example, your button styles, your form styles, form input styles, your grid styles, right? So all those can also be in separate files. Usually that's what people do. Every kind of component, there'll be a separate SCSS file. If you see this file, this colors file, it is prepended with an ampersand, it is prepended with an underscore. Okay. Why it's prepended with an underscore, I'll come to know. So this is the time for us to get to know how to install Sass and actually build Sass files into CSS. So for Sass, you can install this node module. Again, there are lots of ways. If you go to the Sass site, which is basically sasslang.org, it will mention something called compass, which is sasslang.com. Then, okay, sorry. It mentions something called compass that you can install and use. But for that, you'll have to also install Ruby. Okay, so if you have a Mac, then Ruby will be pre-installed. If not, you have to install you'll have to install Ruby using the Ruby installer. So all those directions are here, but we are not going to use Compass and for compilation of Sass. Okay, we are going to use the node module called node-sass. So if you want that way, or you can find all that here, how to install and use it. And for learning Sass, there's a good one-page, very good one-page introduction to Sass. Very terse and very nice. So we'll be installing this. And we'll also install another node package called nodemon. So if you have worked with nodemon, basically you would have seen that it's used for watching changes to your node files, node project files, and recompile and run that node project again. So basically run that node project again. So we'll use nodemon and we'll see how to watch for changes in our Sass directory. So I'm installing both npm install -g node sass as well as nodemon. Okay, nodemon is actually quite large, so it takes quite a while to install. If you use some other way to watch files, you can use that, no problem. Okay, so it's installed. So to compile Sass files, okay, let's say I have this directory with all the Sass files, and there is this build folder which has all the compiled CSS. Right now, let's say it's empty. So I'm going to empty all of this. So entire folder I'm going to delete. Okay, and I'm going to create a fresh CSS folder within this. So now you have the Sass directory with the Sass files, and you want to compile these and produce the output in CSS folder. So in one shot you can do that. Okay, all you need to do is you have to say node-sass. Okay, I have that mentioned in a package script, package or JSON script. If you want to refer to that, it's here. Okay, so you can run this. Okay, however, that is within backup folder now. So you can see how we are running this. You're saying node-sass. Then we are giving the input directory backup//demo/sass. That's where all our Sass files are. -o for output directory will be backup/demos, Sass demos, build/css. Okay, so you can see that it's got compiled, and all the files in the directory have got compiled. So you can see now the empty CSS folder is again populated with all the CSS files. Now, one important thing why I came to compilation right now. Okay, if you want to watch, you can try this out. Okay, I've also given a reference to understand this. So this is using nodemon to watch that same folder. You can do that. Okay, so I'll leave it for you to explore. If you see, one important thing is that the files that are generated does not have these partial files. So any file, SCSS file that you prepend, which you prefix with an underscore, will not get compiled into its own file. So it doesn't get compiled into its own file. So what's the use of this? Basically, we are using it as an import. For example, here in modularizing styles.css, we are importing colors. Okay, so since it's prepended with an underscore, it won't get compiled into its own file. However, something like reset, which is also being imported, is not prefixed with an underscore here, reset.css. So it will get compiled into its own file. So you can see that reset.css gets compiled into its own file. Such files which with a leading underscore, which don't get compiled, which are simply used as imports, are called partial files in SCSS. So in Sass calls them partials. Okay, so they're exclusively for use as imports and other files. They cannot be used separately because the equivalent CSS file is not generated. All right, so we have seen modularizing. So next thing is variables. So some things, just like you have done variable manipulation, again you're just using variables here. What are the kind of variable manipulations you can do? Again, you can do plus, you can do minus, all the mathematical operations. You can do multiplication. You have functions just like in less to lighten the color. All right. So all those things hold good. Variables can take named values. They can take font stacks, for example. They can take united values. Anything. All right. So it's the same thing. And then coming to mixins, only the syntax differs everywhere. Mixins are defined this way. So instead of a dot and saying border radius that we did like this in less, here we'll say you'll use the directive at mixin space name of the mixin variable. So dollar, not at dollar radius, the default value, and same old code. All right. And the way you'll use mixins also differs. So there we just said dot border radius wherever we wanted to use. Here we'll be saying at include. So there's this include directive. Add include border radius, and if you want to give a value, you can give. Otherwise, if you want to use the default value, parameter value, you can skip that also. All right. So that's about mixins. So only the syntax differs. Then there is this concept of inheritance, which I'll just quickly mention. We have already run out of time. So I just want to mention these two things, especially for SCSS. One is inheritance, other is grid. Okay. So it might take another 5 minutes. So there's a question from somebody. I don't know who the viewer is. Mithun has sent me across. What is the compatibility of CSS Grid system with browsers? Okay, that's not something that's related to this talk as such. but you can definitely go. So CSS Grid is a new feature in CSS. So anytime you want to find out, okay, what is the compatibility of any kind of CSS feature, head over to caniuse.com and search for that. Just search for CSS Grid. All right, you can see that it is quite okay with IE and Edge versions 11 and 15. It's sort of okay with all other browsers. Chrome recently enough also, like 49, you can see the release date, last year only released, does not support. So CSS Grid is not yet ready for production level code. Okay, the question is from Venkat. All right, so CSS Grids, in one sentence, if I had to say, it's not ready for production level code. But of course, you can use something like Post CSS and still use grids, and you can compile it into a way that is old CSS. Okay, so and it's not even supported in recently old mobile browsers also. All right, so CSS Grid don't use. So now coming back to this inheritance. All right, this is a concept that I wanted to discuss quickly. So if you have, this is a common pattern that you will see in a lot of CSS code. For example, you want to build something like this. Right, so you want to build some messaging alert, basically alert kind of widget component. This is a normal default alert. This is a success alert. This is, let's say, an error. You'll display with the red border, and maybe a warning or something you will display with the gold border. So to achieve this kind of thing, you'll have usually write in CSS such kind of classes. So you'll define something like a message class with the base set of styles. All right, so a default message will get the styles, a border, a padding, and color. All right, again, you're repeating yourself with the border radius. This is just CSS. And then you will define message success class, which will change the border radius for success, error, which will change the border radius, and warning, which will change the border radius. It's going to override those styles set from the base class. Okay, so this is a base set of styles, which is given by this class. And the way you'll use it usually in CSS is to give both the classes, the base, the one which gives the base set of styles, as well as the one that overrides the border. So for success, you'll have to add additionally message success. So there'll be two classes. All right, this is how you usually do in CSS. In Sass, there is something known as inheritance. Okay, actually, probably I should take this in detail, but I really don't have the time. So I'll just quickly mention what it does. So in Sass, when you're working in Sass, all right, so you can define your Sass file like this, the classes like this. So what you will do, okay, this is what we have seen earlier, border radius mixin and variables. You will define a message class with usual border, padding, color, and border radius through the mixin we have included. The difference comes in the modifier classes, message success, message error, and message warning. Instead of simply overriding the border color, all right, what we are doing is we are saying add extend dot message. So this is sort of like inheritance, which is there in, which is brought into CSS. So you can say that Sass brings in inheritance to CSS classes. It's almost like message success, error, and warning have inherited all the properties set inside this. So now if you simply use message success, it's enough. If you see the way we are using it now, okay, the way we are using this is we are using simply message and not message space message success. Okay. And the way we are using it is simply message error and not message space message error. So how is it actually message error class? How does it actually get even the styles that are applied for message? Apart from its own border color, how does it get all the border radius, border width, everything that's set on message? So the way it achieves that, if you see the translated code, if you see the translated CSS file, is basically it adds to the selector for message, it adds the other selectors also. So even for the message success or the message error or message warning elements, it gives all these things you set up on the message element. So that's how it achieves inheritance. So if you are inheriting something from another class, if you're inheriting, for example, message success from message class, then to that selector it adds, to the message selector it adds the inherited thing selector also. So basically all these styles will come into these elements also. Okay, so it's quite simpler to use when compared to your now. So you don't have to use two classes now. You simply have to use one class. All right, you simply have to use one class and you're done basically. You don't have to use one BTN primary, BTN success, or message success. Nothing like that is necessary. Okay, so that's inheritance. I'll leave you with a small example of Sass. So if you want to get something like a grid system, all right, you can, this is a very simple grid system that's shown without any gutter space, nothing like that. You even have looping conditionals and all. Okay, I just wanted to leave you with that idea. That's it. For example, here we have defined a variable called grid with 100%, a variable for row of the grid system, and a variable for column classes. So how you should interpret this is going to generate column -1, column -2. So it's a loop that's going on 1 to 4, looping from 1 to 4, and the variable is loop variable is $call. So this will be substituted. This entire thing will be substituted with 1, 2, 3, 4. So you'll get class is called call-1, call-2, call-3, call-4, and for each of those the grid width will differ. All right, because you're dividing by the number of columns. And when you're using it, I don't want you to understand this properly anyway, just to leave you with an idea of what is possible. So you can build entire grid systems and all with Sass, and even less. So that's what even Bootstrap does. Bootstrap was earlier using Sass, then it had a less, then it had a Sass port for it, and now it has wholly moved to Sass. All Bootstrap is written using Sass. So the way it will generate, you will see grid system, it will generate such classes now. Okay. So it has generated with :100, with :50. Basically, whatever is width divided 100 by 2, 100 by 3, 100 by 4. All right. And when you want to use it, this is a very naive thing. It's not a proper grid system. Just wanted to give you an idea. Right. So when you want to use it, you'll use it like you normally use a grid system. You'll say, okay, div class equal to row, and then within that column, whatever kind of column. So it's a 4-column layout. So I've used call for, so it'll get 25, 25, 25, 25%, and it's going to look like this. Okay, so a very naive grid system, no cutters. It doesn't take care of any cases. Okay, but just to give you an idea. So if you want more information on Sass, you can head over to the Sass site. All right, I'll be sharing with you this entire set of demos. This README file is also there, so all these references are there for you to go through. So how you'll watch, you can go through that also. So whenever you make changes to the directory, Sass directory, automatically the build is triggered, because how to do that using nodemon. I'll just leave you with the way. It's basically you have to execute this script. So in package.json, I've included an npm script. So if you execute this, it's basically going to keep watching for this directory. Whenever it changes, whenever any SCSS extension file changes, it will run the build again. Okay. So if you're interested in learning more, please head over to these sites, and you can also explore PostCSS and Stylus, which are other alternatives. Okay, so I've come to the end of the session, folks. We have this has been brought to you by SKUcode. SKUcode is an education startup. We are into training on various front and back end technologies, mostly JavaScript based. So if you want to know about more about our trainings, you can go to skewcode.com. There is also a front-end web development training that's starting on November 18th. All right. Our courses are basically for both working professionals and people who are trying to shift their careers. So there are lots of courses coming up, including Node.js course, AngularJS, React.js, and a front-end web development course that's coming up on November 18th. I'm the instructor for the front-end web development course. There are other instructors at SKUcode who handle React, Angular, Node, and we're also coming up with some more uh, some more topics. All right, so we are coming to the end of this webinar. Any questions? I'm ready to take your questions now. Right, I'm not sure if there are any questions. Let me just check, and then if there are no questions, I think we can end the session. Okay, I'm not really sure because I don't see your questions. I have to receive it. All right, so I guess there are no questions. All right, if you want to get in touch with me, you can get in touch through the JS meetup group channel on Slack or on WhatsApp, or you can get in touch with Mithun, who's the founder of SKUcode. Thanks for attending the session, guys. So we'll be closing this session now. All right, guys. So we'll end the session now. See you.